To start off 2024, here is the much delayed part 2 of my response to Level With Me. You can watch part 1 via the pop-up on the top right of the screen. Let's get this started.
I do have a question though. Sometimes when we're watching the ISS footage, you'll see the astronauts sometimes connected to like wires and harnesses. Is that to keep them like in the frame during the broadcast, or what's the reason for that?
The reason is that there are no harnesses. In this video, the guys who made this film didn't notice that the object behind the astronaut is solid black, and failed to consider that said wall could be reflective. It's not a harness, it's a reflection of his face.
No, I haven't actually. You mean while they're inside the shuttle?
Yeah, like when they're inside the ISS, sometimes during the feeds.
How many times are they gonna reuse this video? It's been debunked at least 601 times already. Anyway, for the 602nd time, the astronaut's pocket is being grabbed, not a harness. We can deduce this due to the fact that the only part of his clothing that moves with the hand is the side pocket, the one place where any hypothetical harness would end up tearing it off if attached to the pants.
The broadcast, you'll see kind of pulling on their belts or something like that.
This one's also pretty common. The explanation is that the shirt is folded, not taut. The astronaut is shifting slightly towards the direction where the supposed harness would be, and yet the shirt doesn't change shape. The shirt is wrinkled, not attached to a harness.
I've seen the flip before, and it almost looked like a foot was caught like inside something, but there was nothing really there. It was really strange. I didn't know if there was something to kind of like hold them in place or something.
Nope. His left leg is kept suspended because he wants to demonstrate weightlessness and the fact that this means he can stop himself with one leg without much trouble. His right arm is kept suspended because he doesn't want to bump into the other astronaut who is holding a microphone. No harness required.
We never had anything like that, but they may have learned over time that it was hard to stay still, and they may have come up with something.
Did you ever think the public would find out that all the spacewalks were filmed underwater?
Thanks, sir.
That's a loaded question. They weren't filmed underwater.
Most of the public have no idea that the ISS is located in an underwater neutral buoyancy lab in Houston, Texas. The space station footage that they trick us with is not travelling at 17,500 miles per hour above your head. It's all being filmed here on Earth. An exact ISS replica underwater. Coincidence?
No. It is no coincidence that a replica of the ISS is in a swimming pool. It's used for training, because a swimming pool is the closest we can get to simulating space without airplanes.
It's a pretty simple process. Film your footage underwater, remove the water layer, add in your CGI Earth layer, and cast your spell.
These guys love explaining how it would be hypothetically possible to fake footage, but never end up demonstrating that the footage is fake. Let's see how they'll attempt to do so this time.
1, 2, 3, bubbles in space!
And it's the rehashed space bubble argument. This argument is reused from the first movie, by the way. See what I mean when I say they haven't had a new argument in years? I've debunked this 3 separate times on my channel before, so I'll make this one quick. They're not bubbles. They're ice crystals. The ice is formed because the change in pressure between the airlock and space, a vacuum, allows the water vapor to quickly cool and freeze, in the same way that the lower pressure of the upper atmosphere allows for clouds to form.
The International Space Station, that's a complete fraud. It's a complete hoax. I don't believe that all these astronauts are living up there and doing all this. Every single time that they do some type of live demonstration, you can see some type of faulty wiring, some type of glitch. They're literally being held up by strings.
Could you, prove that? Again, these clips are reused from level 1, I'll just debunk them quickly. The red shirt was folded before he knelt down in the same way that the previous folded shirt incident was. No harness needed there. The man in the background has nothing attaching his body to the walls or ceiling of the ISS. If there were strings there, then they would have to be so thin that they would break under his weight.
Green screens, wires, CGI, augmented reality, all sorts of issues. Think about this.
Yeah, we should really think about how your arguments add up to nothing and go nowhere, only for you to reheat them and serve them again like Thursday's leftovers.
They always have the women with long flowing hair. That would never be allowed.
They literally spray hairspray in their hair to make it look like their hair is floating in zero gravity.
Take note of how those two clips contradict each other. The hair is kept long, which shouldn't be allowed according to him because it would get everywhere, but the hair is also kept in a consistent shape thanks to hairspray. The hair is allowed to be long because the hairspray stops it from getting in their faces. One guy gives an argument, and then the next guy debunks it, and yet this is somehow getting greenlit by Hibbler and placed in their films. You can't make this stuff up.
The International Space Station, brought to you by the same guys who faked 6 moon missions. Yeah, I believe that.
I get that you're trying to make some poignant speech or whatever, but the sarcasm really doesn't have any impact when we're 3 movies in and you still haven't provided a shred of evidence that any of this is fake.
You know, I don't know exactly how they're videotaping themselves. They could be on one of those zero-G planes.
Level 1 already made this argument. It's debunked by the fact that the height you would need to fall from in order to get enough time and weightlessness for making the ISS interviews, which are 20 minutes long and up, would be enough to destroy the airplanes when they come back into the atmosphere.
I'm not sure how they're doing it, but I don't believe it at all. It looks like a bunch of green screen. I don't believe that at all.
This is the problem with posting random videos without context. The 3D render used here may be part of a movie, or an ad. Hibbler's crew does nothing to demonstrate that this is being passed off as real by NASA.
Running around in gorilla suits, going 17,500 miles an hour. There's supposedly micrometeorites, other satellites up there. They could die at any second, but they're running around playing with water. They're always playing with water.
These people are spending months, even years of their lives on the ISS. Claiming that these people spending any of their time not worrying about something out of their control is somehow evidence that the ISS is fake is absurd. This logic applies to literally anything. Why watch a movie on an airplane when the engine could explode at any moment? Why tell jokes to your coworkers on your lunch break when the walls could come down and crush you at any moment? Heck, why wake up in the morning and do anything fun rather than spend every second of your life worrying about the fact that you could randomly have a heart attack and die at any moment? I'll tell you why. Because that's an exhausting, wasteful, miserable, and pointless way to live your life. The fact that you see people having fun in their free time and think that's a conspiracy demonstrates that you're a petty, petulant prick.
People can watch all these ups and trickery by NASA and all these other space agencies.
What mistakes? What trickery? You have yet to provide a single example of NASA or any other space agency faking anything and passing it off as real.
And all that goes out the window because they see a little light in the sky and it's the ISS. Oh yeah, that's the ISS. That's all the proof they need.
You got any evidence to the contrary? I'd love to see it.
I've seen the light go from horizon to horizon. There's many problems with that light. First, it's as bright as the sun. It's really bright. How is the ISS reflecting that light as bright as the sun back to me the whole way across? Is it made of mirrors?
Not exactly. The ISS has a collection of solar panels. While they do their job well enough to power the station, solar panels are quite reflective. Considering how large the panels are, it's not hard to figure out why the light from the ISS can be seen with the naked eye.
I was in communication with a NASA whistleblower.
Oh, a NASA whistleblower, you say? Considering how much you've been lying throughout this movie, I somehow find that hard to believe.
He says that they have 5 B-2 bombers that they've modified with some parts of them are transparent material with a thin metal struts that you really can't see. The bottom was overlaid with LEDs to match the color of the sun. And they use them in their base. 2 of them are in Alaska, and I forget where the other ones are. And they take turns doing these flybys.
Sorry, Dave, but your whistleblower's a dud. The explanation has multiple holes in it, such as the B-2 bombers not being aerodynamic enough to maintain stable flight if they had props to replicate the ISS attached to them. This has no explanation for the lack of contrails as well. But, most importantly, the distance to the ISS has been repeatedly measured both professionally and by amateurs, and it's far too high for air-breathing engines to function. There is no way to get around it. The ISS is real.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'd like to bring to your attention a potential fraud on an enormous scale happening in York County. There's now clear evidence of NASA using numerous methods to grossly mislead the public about astronauts being on the International Space Station.
Bring it.
During interior ISS scenes from NASA's own live feed, the use of wires, harnesses, green screens, and virtual reality have been detected to achieve the appearance of a weightless environment.
And I've already debunked all of these. Thank you.
This begs the obvious question. If they're really up there, why are they using Hollywood techniques to fake the footage?
Because they're not faking the footage.
Are they in space or are they underwater?
They're in space.
Now what's really interesting is that they train for spacewalks in an underwater pool with a complete ISS replica. Now surely they aren't filming these spacewalks in an underwater pool and then editing them to appear if they're in space. Because that sure would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be something. But they're not underwater. So it's really nothing.
I'm calling on the Brevard County Commissioners to open a full investigation into NASA's fraudulent practices and use of taxpayer dollars.
There isn't really a need for such an investigation when all of your evidence for their supposed fakery can be debunked with 30 seconds of research.
It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going.
They do have a darn good explanation. The footage is not fake.
It is our duty to expose and eliminate this fraudulent and astronomically wasteful ISS program. And look, I know what you're all thinking. The NASA is part of the federal government, and you're just county commissioners.
Nope. What they're actually thinking is, how did this guy tie his shoes this morning?
Flat Earthers pay attention. We're paying attention to NASA.
And lie about it constantly.
We're paying attention to SpaceX.
And lie about it constantly.
Most people aren't, but yet they'll defend it.
Yes, because a layman is smarter and more honest than you.
Once you start paying attention and have an open mind,
then you'll realize that the people who made this movie are lying con men.
We do want to make sure that the American people understand that there's no need to panic. The president took this action, as I mentioned earlier, because the objects were indeed flying at lower elevation and they were in civilian airspace, and we wanted to make sure that we protected that airspace. But again, we want to also make sure that the Americans are not do not panic during this time.
Wait, what? It's on a balloon? Why is there a satellite on a balloon?
That one was most likely a spy satellite, which was likely attached to a balloon because it was cheaper to do that than it would be to launch one into space for a similar purpose. This isn't hard.
It's always been that way. Flat Earthers have been talking about this for a long time.
Yes, and Flat Earthers still have yet to demonstrate that all of them are balloons.
So why do you think NASA is the world's largest consumer of helium?
Because these satellites need to be replaced constantly, which requires a large amount of helium.
Why would they send up balloons, these satellites, on balloons if they're in magical floating space, in the magical floating vacuum of space?
Because the satellites in space and the satellites on balloons serve different purposes.
They're showing us, they're telling you right now, they're telling us in plain sight, hey look, satellites are on balloons, they're not in magical space.
The ones that are on balloons are not in space. The satellites used for GPS and other things that require you to be a lot higher up are in space.
The idea that you would need some type of box that free falls in orbit around a ball is really just a fiction of imagination. That we don't need that at all.
Actually, they are very useful. Again, consistent GPS signals are made possible over most of Earth's surface, even over oceans, because of satellites in space.
Satellites have been on balloons since the 50s, and they've always been on balloons. They just lied about putting them in space. There's no evidence at all of satellites in space.
This is false. You can see them overhead and measure the distance to them in the same way that the ISS has. Wolfie 6020 has done this repeatedly. The easiest way to do it is with geostationary satellites. You can see them not only change in position relative to the stars in the sky over the course of a single night, but you can also see them move into Earth's shadow, something that you don't see with stars.
They would have to have a propulsion system. Even if you believe that the Earth is a ball, You must also believe that satellites cannot propel themselves without a source to thrust. Okay? We know that they don't have engines on them. What's making them go around? They don't make sense.
Actually, it does make sense. Using a rocket for propulsion, you can get a satellite moving fast enough in a tangential direction to Earth's surface that it will continuously miss the Earth. This is called an orbit. Since space is a vacuum, there is almost nothing to slow the satellite down, allowing for it to stay in orbit without an engine for potentially thousands of years.
Then you find out NASA owns 98% of the helium.
I've already explained this.
Then you find out all these satellites that crash have balloons attached to them.
Because the ones that fell from space were either vaporized upon re-entry or landed in the ocean. Usually both.
Then you can deduce they actually float these satellites over balloons.
Yeah. And?
It's that simple. If all these satellites are moving 17,500 miles an hour, some are moving this way, some are moving that way, it's common sense. There's 50,000 of them. They're supposed to hit each other eventually, but none of them hit each other. Come on, guys.
Actually, there have been several crashes between satellites. You just have to look it up, guys. You know, do your own research.
The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. It's orbiting in an elliptical orbit, speeding up and slowing down at 66,000 miles an hour. It's chasing the sun in another curved orbit, and we somehow have geostationary satellites. That's a satellite that stays above the same plot of land. So it's mimicking the spin, it's mimicking the orbit, it's speeding up and slowing down and staying over that same plot of land, and it's just falling in an ever-ending fall. That makes absolutely no sense.
That's an argument from incredulity. Saying that it doesn't make sense doesn't make it go away. And yes, it does make sense when you understand physics. Earth's gravity makes sure that the satellite follows it as it orbits the sun, making sure that all movements that the Earth makes are irrelevant to this. The geostationary satellites orbit the Earth at the same speed that the Earth rotates. That's how they're able to stay over the same plot of land.
And now it's openly accepted that they're on balloons, but they're making it seem like it's a new thing. And this is the new way we're going to launch satellites is on balloons, and it's cheaper, and it's just better. Like, we don't need them space ones no more.
One of the most intriguing and fascinating things I've found about flat earthers is how willing they are to completely make up a confession from NASA and then roll with that for several minutes. Once again, the satellites on balloons are used for a different purpose than the ones in space, because they can't stay in the air for very long and are not as high up.
And majority of all the transmissions we use for our cell phones or quote-unquote satellite TV are all ground towers. They all send transmissions from the ground tower to tower, admittedly at high elevations. And of course we have underground and undersea cables that make up 99.9% of all transmission.
Witsit says this while ignoring the existence of GPS, something that is notorious for losing accuracy due to conditions such as cloud cover, which would not happen if it was done via grounded or underground devices.
Whether it's the ISS or the rocket launch, the second someone sees it with their own eyes, they think it's real.
Implying that there's evidence that it isn't real? Again, you have yet to provide any.
This is freaking amazing! Oh, there it is. What the heck happened?
That stage ran out of fuel. A few seconds later, the next stage's engine would ignite. That's what the heck happened.
The reason that you can always find a video of a rocket from NASA taking off and then slowly making a U-shaped arc is not because it's going around the ball and going to the other side or going out into space. It's because shortly after these rockets that are funded by your tax dollars take off, they only have a certain amount of time before they crash back to the Earth because they run out of fuel. It's all made up.
Any evidence?
So what really happens is they launch them near the ocean, in Texas or in Florida. They will never launch a rocket from the middle of the country. It won't make it to the ocean. It'll crash on dry land.
Again, incorrect. Time to teach you how rocket launches work. The reason why rockets are launched from Florida and Texas is not because they are near water. It is because they are the closest states to the equator, aside from Hawaii. I hope I don't have to explain why hauling a rocket across the Pacific is not practical. In order to reach orbit, a rocket needs to be moving at thousands of miles per hour. This, obviously, takes a lot of fuel and power, so we need to find opportunities to minimize the required resources. The closer you get to the equator, the faster the Earth rotates. Thanks to conservation of momentum, this means that rockets launched near the equator get a running start, saving lots of fuel. This is stuff you learn in a high school physics class. Of course, you wouldn't know that, since you probably slept through it. And with that, we are done with part 2 of Level with Me. Stay tuned for part 3, where we will be learning all about the non-existent firmament and its equally fake modern history, whatever that means. Here's to a happy 2024.